In one of my recent videos, I did a special on the Rolling Stones top 500 albums of all time. That was in the fall of 2020. And it got me thinking because back their prior top 500 album list was in 2003. And I remembered they did a top 100 guitarists in 2003 as well. And this is it. So I went back and I dug it out. And what made me dig it out was the passing of Eddie Van Halen. And I remembered how far his stock had fallen by 2003. So I thought, well, let's look into this list a little bit. Now, I just found out today that Rolling Stone is publishing a new top 100 guitarists of all time. So I'm getting scooped by the publication that I'm reviewing here and critiquing. But I figured let me get this one out and then I'll do another review on the new list. So this list, as I said, came out in 2003. And I'm going to just start on the back end here. We're going to start with number one. Guess who's number one? Hendrix, of course. Now, this list was compiled by writers from the Rolling Stone. So let me give you the top 10 here. We have number one, Hendrix. Number two, Duane Allman. 3, B.B. King. 4, Eric Clapton. 5, Robert Johnson. 6, Chuck Berry. 7, Stevie Ray Vaughan. 8, Ry Cooder. 9, Jimmy Page. And 10, Keith Richards. So let me just look at those. I'm going to deal with 10 at a time here. So in this top 10, back in 2003, we see a focus on the top guitarists as being blues-based guys. No question about it. Duane Allman at number 2 obviously only had a couple albums with the Allman Brothers and didn't really have he had a very short career, really. He did session work, highly respected player. But number 2, wow, that's an awful lofty position. Now, any of these top 10 guys could, on any given day, probably be in the number 1 spot. In this case, Allman at 2. So B.B. King, a giant, of course, top 10, no problem at all. Same thing with Robert Johnson at number 5. Probably the one guitarist that rock is most indebted to is Robert Johnson. And then Chuck Berry took that, countrified it a bit. Also a huge influence. Stevie Ray Vaughan, yeah, a fantastic blues player. His stock has always remained high. And at the time of this, I'm not that surprised he was rated at number 7. Now, as we get to number 8, Ry Cooder, that is a surprise because Ry Cooder, he's been more of not a world music type of guitarist, but a lot of different types of styles, a lot of soundtracks, some session work, played with Taj Mahal and the Rising Suns, did a little bit with Captain Beefheart. His biggest influence might have been on Keith Richards from the Stones. If it wasn't for Ry Cooder, I'm not sure that Sticky Fingers would have ever sounded like it did. So that's kind of a surprise. I'm not against that, but I'm glad to see he's getting some respect here. 8 is a high number. Jimmy Page at 9 and Keith Richards at 10. So Page, I would say Page, obviously being in arguably the biggest, hardest rocking rock group of all time, Led Zeppelin. He's a riff guitarist, great producer. I don't know. I've always thought he was a little bit overrated. Here's a picture of him bowing the guitar. The bow, I thought, was just a gimmick. I never thought he utilized the bow to any effect whatsoever, really. There's other things he did with the guitar, with feedback and more on the production side, I thought that made him more notable. But Zeppelin carries some pretty big prestige there. Okay, we're going to go to the next 10. This is where it gets a little more interesting, a little less predictable. At 11, we have Kirk Hammett from Metallica. And obviously Metallica would have been huge in 2003. I'm a little surprised he's this high. I get giving him some visibility on this list high up because of the type of music. Metallica is an important band. But wow, was he that influential? Maybe he was. Number 12, Kurt Cobain. Now Cobain, I remember when he came out, they were comparing him, the whole grunge thing. He was compared to Neil Young. And I really like his solos, and I think he's very good. But I mean, number 12 is an awful high ranking for a guy with not a lot of technique, really. The next guy had some technique, and that's Jerry Garcia, number What is he? Number 13. Garcia, you know, I think he's also a bit overrated in this listing of 13 because I always considered him a bit of a noodler, and a very good noodler, and the jam band style that he helped pioneer and help, you know, really entrance the crowd with his playing, I think is important. His bluegrass and country background make him a dynamic and a well-versed guitarist, a wide-range guitarist. And I don't know, 13, what do you guys think about that? We have Jeff Beck at 14. Now, I think Jeff Beck could, on his best day, could be number 1 easily. But again, he's one of the few guitarists who, from the 60s and 70s players, who has never stopped growing and changing and improving his technique. And if you've ever seen him live even recently, you'll know exactly what I mean. 15, Carlos Santana. Okay, yeah, Santana with his Latin rhythms, he's always been considered very, very high on most people's lists. Very nice, soft technique. He can do all kinds of things. He's a little more jazzy, which is what I like. We have here number 16, Johnny Ramone. Now this, I don't agree with this at all. Johnny Ramone, I mean, punk music to me was mostly a responsive type of music. It was a reactionary music to disco, to the hippie scene of the 60s, to the prog rock. So to me, punk was really anti-guitar. You know, some of this stuff I could probably play with my feet. You know, it's not, and technique isn't all it's cracked up to be either. But I want you to remember this position at number 16, because as we get down to some of the lower numbers, we're going to see how that compares with Johnny Ramone. 17, we have Jack White of the White Stripes. Okay, very good. And then John Frusciante, Red Hot Chili Peppers. At the time, very, I wouldn't say up-and-coming guys, but guys that were newer guys that certainly have held their position, I think. 2 great players. Number 19, another surprise, Richard Thompson. Richard Thompson was in Fairport Convention. He's generally an acoustic finger-picking guitar player. And I am shocked that he is at 19. And for my money, there are a couple other British players from the 60s that were far more influential than Thompson, Bert Jansch being one of them. And I'm a little surprised he's this high. Number 20, James Burton. Okay, yeah, no problems there. He's one of the pioneers, I guess, of the Fender Telecaster, and played in a lot of 50s and 60s songs. 22, we have Mike Bloomfield, another blues guy, Chicago blues guy. I skipped 21 here, that's George Harrison of the Beatles. Harrison, I think, is probably most notable. He's more of a country-style guitar player. He was a big Carl Perkins guy, a little bit of a Chet Atkins type of player, I guess, not a blues player. And his playing is very melodic. His solos are very, very melodic and very beautiful. And he took somewhat of a hiatus in the mid-60s when he started studying sitar, which I think may have hampered his growth in the decade of the 60s. And, you know, if you're a Beatle, that's going to give you a little bit of a higher positioning, most likely. Okay, Bloomfield at 22. 23, Warren Hayes. So he's from Government Mule, played some with the later edition of the Allman Brothers. 23, wow, I'm surprised at that. He's known as a great player, for sure. 24, The Edge. Okay, now U2, I always thought when I heard them for the first time, what he was doing with the guitar sonically, I thought was really interesting. And as U2 grew into that Achtung Baby era, I thought he continued to improve and make some really interesting sounds that really nobody else was making with his guitar. 25, Freddie King. He's a Chicago blues guy. Okay, Tom Morello, Rage Against the Machine at number 26. 27, Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits. Okay. 28, Stephen Stills. That's fairly high for Stephen Stills. A very versatile player, great on acoustic, great on electric. He can do just about anything. I'm surprised they gave him that much elevation on this list. Ron Ashton is number 29 of the Stooges. Now he's kind of I guess you consider him proto-punk, and I don't know why I would put him beneath Johnny Ramone. but he's 13 positions underneath him. 30, we've got Buddy Guy. Okay, Buddy Guy, yeah, he was a huge influence on Clapton and Hendrix. I happened to see Buddy Guy open for the Stones in, I think, 2015, and he was incredible. Great player. 30, okay, so next batch of 10, we are 31, Dick Dale. Okay, Dick Dale, the godfather, the father of surf guitar. So yeah, that was a huge influence on a lot of rock players that came after him. Sure, he belongs on here. 32, John Cipollina of Quicksilver Messenger Service. Now, this really surprises me. His co-guitar player, Gary Duncan, was also considered a good player. But Cipollina, I mean, does anybody listen to Quicksilver Messenger Service anymore? I mean, nobody talks. I mean, this could only come from a San Francisco publication, probably, to rate Cipollina this high. That's all I got to say. Okay, 33, 34, we've got two guys from Sonic Youth, Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo. Don't know as much about Sonic Youth, but it's kind of nice seeing a duo get credited. Next, 35, we got John Fahey. 36, Steve Cropper, Booker T and the MGs, extremely clean player, influential on the 60s players, the British players in particular. 38, Peter Green, another blues guy. So yeah, he's always been cited very high, played with John Mayall, and came up through the ranks to become a great player before he sort of lost his mind, I guess. 39, Brian May. Now, I hear tons about Brian May. The way his guitar was set up, very unique, and the type of band he was in, he really, as a guitar player, had to do something with the guitar that was different, and I think he was able to do that with Queen. Moving along, we're in the next batch here. Number 40, we have John Fogerty. Now, who would have thought Fogerty would be on this list at all? Again, we have got another San Francisco guy here. And I'm a Fogerty fan. Just listen to Ramble Tamble. That's off of Cosmos Factory. You know, a little more countrified as well. As is the next guy, Clarence White of the Byrds. He's more bluegrass. Now, Clarence White is your typical bluegrass player that could just smoke them. You know, he died young. He died in '73, hit by a car. And the Byrds, when they entered their second phase, it was a little more the country rock phase. He was a standout player. He was the attraction. He was such a great player, fast, and he was also the recipient of the string bender. He played with this a custom guitar that bent one or two strings at a time. That kind of made his guitar sound like a steel guitar. 42, Robert Fripp of Giles, and Fripp, of course. King Crimson, okay, we got you. Great player. Yeah, he is out there. His playing is out there. I did see King Crimson in the 90s with the double trio. He had, it was Adrian Belew was the other guitar player. So yeah, he's a really special player for sure. He should be on this list. Scotty Moore, Elvis Presley's guitarist at 44, very good. 43, we had Eddie Hazel of Funkadelic. He also died young, and I don't know much about his playing, but I'll have to give that album a listen. So here we are at 40, where's 44? Oh, Scotty Moore was 44. Okay, these aren't always in order. 45, Frank Zappa. Now Zappa, his guitar playing just never reached me, just never did anything for me. And Zappa's music, for me, has always been, I always considered it a bit, I call it like esoteric pretension, as if he doesn't quite, he has like some contempt for his listeners or something. And the guitar playing shows it. It doesn't, he's not free. He doesn't, I mean, people will disagree with me. I've heard some of his live stuff where he's very good, and there's times when he is on, but it doesn't go anywhere for me. You know, he's a composer, and I think he's that first and foremost. 46, Les Paul, from my home state. You know, the inventor of the electric guitar. Of course, he belongs on here. 47, T-Bone Walker, who they say invented the guitar solo as we know it. 48, Joe Perry, Aerosmith. Yeah, he's another, I would call him a blues-based, blues rock guitar player. One of the great 70s players. You know, as the mid-70s came around and some of the harder rock bands like Bad Company and Foreigner, The guitar playing got a little bit less blues-based. Joe Perry never lost that. 49, John McLaughlin. So here we have a first bona fide jazz player on this list coming in at number 49. And McLaughlin started a British player, started with Graham Bond way back and was playing with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, and eventually graduated to Miles Davis in that whole fusion era, starting in like about 69. And he's just an amazing player. Number 50 is Pete Townshend. Yeah, Townshend is a guy that I always talk about because there are very few guys who can play in a solo on acoustic guitar in a really heavy rock band. And this guy can totally do it. Check out Levy and For Keepin'. Okay, I'm going to stop the video at the halfway point, and we're going to cover the next 50 players in a second video, and you're going to find some very interesting surprises there. So stay tuned, that's coming up next here on Pop Goes the 60s.